Hello and welcome to Program 19, Ways to Transform Obstacles to Building Blocks. This is the voice of Bold Business Radio, and I am your host, Jessica Dewell of Red Direction. We have a responsibility for the impact that we make, and it's up to us to decide what the impact is and how big it will be. I just used two skills in the same sentence, responsibility and decision-making. Both of these begin with being intentional, and intentional is a choice. I'm going to share an Aesop's Fable. They're some of my favorite things, and they transcend age. A goat herder had sought to bring back a stray goat to his flock. He whistled, and then he sounded his horn in vain. The straggler paid no attention to the summons, and at last the goat herder threw a stone and broke its horn. But then he begged the goat not to tell his master. And the goat replied, "Why, you silly fellow, the horn will speak, though I will be silent." The moral of this story: do not attempt to hide things which cannot be hid. So what if we're intentional and we face our problems instead of pretend they don't exist? When they come up, we can try and hide them. The thing is, it turns out to be in plain sight to everybody. It turns into avoidance sometimes, and it takes a lot of energy to not see. Knowing we can't ignore them forever, problems, they just kind of hang around and they fester. So what if we were intentional about them? Recognizing there is a problem is the first step. This takes confidence and courage, especially when we're reflecting on ourselves. This awareness, though, lets us look at where we are strong and where we are building our strength. Right after this, Les Dossey and I will talk about ways to transform obstacles into building blocks.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
Les, thank you, and I am so glad you were here today.
Jess, it's good to be here. I'm glad to be back. I'll tell you, I'm kind of getting in my groove having these weekly, what do we call this anyway?
I know,
weekly
right?
powwows?
I like powwow. Yeah, this is action-based business conversation. So that's how it's portrayed on the Voice of Bold Business website. So I love the powwow. I love the development of the idea, this one-to-one conversation that's about action-based business for the leaders that we both work with.
Yeah, well, so are you going to get us started?
I am. What did you think about that Aesop's Fable of the goat herder?
Well, it made me think of another story that I heard some time ago. An old Indian chief sitting around a fire one evening with his grandkids and his great-grandkids, and over the mountains they could hear a storm brewing, and it was obvious to the grandfather that the storm was going to cross over the mountain and it would be upon them in pretty short order. And while they were sitting there talking and telling stories and just enjoying each other's company, the children noticed that the cows were running away from the storm and the buffalo were running towards it. And they asked the grandfather why. They were really curious about it. And the grandfather said, well, the cows are dumb and the buffaloes are smart. They're wise. And the kids said, well, what do you mean? Why are the cows dumb and why are the buffalo wise? The grandfather said, because the buffalo knows something the cows don't. See, the cows are trying to outrun the storm, but they can't. And in the state of running away, it means they have to suffer the fear of and the threat of the storm much longer than the buffalo, who run to the base of the mountain so that the storm will pass over them much more quickly. So,
okay.
What a great story, right?
It is a great story, yes. And what they both have in common is that we know something has happened or we know something is happening and we have a choice to make.
When we're talking about problems and obstacles and barriers, and that's how I define them. And I think there's three specific kinds of issues that we have to deal with. It's important to remember that only to give our energy or our power or our strength to the ones that we can actually do something about, that we can actually influence. Because what happens for so many people is that they get all tangled up in other words, they lose their power, they lose their energy, they lose their effectiveness to things they can't control or influence. Covey was really good about breaking that down. Stephen Covey.
Yes, he really was,
You know,
with the 7 habits in each one, and how he turned each one of them into a skill really that we can practice.
in particular, finding ways to really quickly identify the things that you can actually influence and the things you can't, withdrawing your energy from the things you can't and focusing it on the things that you can influence.
You know, we're talking about influence, and I want to come back to that. You had mentioned that there were, I call everything a problem, whether it's an issue, a barrier, an obstacle, and you broke it down into problems, obstacles, and barriers. So for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to use the 3, and I want to have you define each for us so that we can bring the audience along with us.
So I'll tackle problems first. You know, problems are like issues that arise in the day-to-day that require immediate attention, but then most of the time they can be fixed pretty quickly. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Like if you were in the service business and you had delivery trucks or you had service trucks and one of them got a flat, that would be a problem that needed to be fixed pretty quickly. Or the printer's out of ink and it won't print the documents that you need, or traffic is backed up and so you're being delayed from getting to your appointment, or maybe one of your staff members or your employees is late, or the internet is down. Those are all problems, but they can generally be fixed very, very quickly. I wouldn't call those obstacles or barriers. An obstacle is something that's bigger than a problem, and typically it requires more time and energy to resolve. And they kind of come in various shapes and sizes and have varying degrees of complexity. And a lot of them, Jessica, are not external, but they're internal. Like perfectionism is an obstacle for a lot of people. And I know that I've suffered from that myself. And it really has slowed or stalled my progress and my achievement and my growth, because I just needed to give it another day or another hour or another tweak or whatever before I actually launched. I love the way that Seth Godin talks about that particular obstacle. He really boils it down into something, and I don't know his exact words, but he basically says, ready to launch, aim.
Right.
To get past that particular obstacle. And there's others that I would define as being obstacles. You know, maybe your processes in your organization aren't as effective as they could be. And if they are effective, maybe then they're not as efficient as they could be. And so you're not realizing all of the growth that you could realize, or all the profit that you could extract from the product or service, because the process is not effective and efficient. There's a couple of examples of an obstacle. And then I see a barrier. They tend to be completely invisible, and they're more difficult to overcome because they're hard to identify and define. They're frequently comprised of a bunch of unresolved problems and obstacles, and the complexities that build as a result. The human condition is such that we tend to complicate things instead of making them simple. And God knows why we do that, but we are all guilty of it. And it's a habit that can be broken by developing the commitment or the habit of simplifying things. And here's the best example I can give for this particular one, Jessica. When Walt Disney was building out Disneyland and Disney World, he had one objective in mind, and one objective only. And it was to make sure that the people who entered his park with smiles on their faces left the park with even bigger smiles on their faces. And so it was very easy for him to communicate to his people what the objective was. And he didn't need a whole lot of rules to help them ensure that that was the experience that their customers had. He just said, look, you do what needs to be done to ensure that when these people leave here, the smile on their faces is even bigger than the ones they had when they came in. That's like simplifying your entire organization. I encounter a lot of businesses or a lot of organizations who erect these barriers because they put in place all of these complications and rules and barriers that prevent their people from being able to achieve their objectives, if they even have them. Barriers are much, much more difficult to transform, not because they're difficult in and of themselves, but because they're invisible. The complexity and the difficulty of them makes it hard to see where to start or how to begin.
When we were talking about simplicity here a little while ago, one of the things that I know I focus on a lot is articulating the mission, vision, values. And I know that that goes back to the beginning of time, and it's kind of a boring part of business. And actually, a lot of business leaders I talk to, they don't understand the value of being able to articulate the mission and vision values and how it's actually impacting their business. And based off of the previous conversations that we've had, it comes up and comes up. And if I were to just throw it all into the mission, vision, values camp for just a minute, when you talk about simplicity, it's being able to articulate exactly like Walt Disney did in one sentence. What is the outcome?
Right.
What is the objective?
Right.
And it's in that simplicity of being able to do it that everything else becomes clear. And so using the word barrier like you are, these invisible things that we get in our own way and we don't understand why we have some of the problems and some of the obstacles that we do is because we can't grasp the fact that we're trying to define this thing with more and more and more and more language instead of trying to go the opposite direction and get rid of all that language, get rid of everything to get it to its most basic form to actually look at.
Yeah, there's some scientific study, lots of them in fact, that suggests that the best marketing is the marketing that requires the fewest brain calories for the prospect to burn in order to get the message. Donald Miller created this program called Story Brand Framework. What he's figured out is that there's a very clear framework associated with telling a story or communicating a message, and that if you break it down properly and organize the words well, then it becomes very, very easy for everyone, your employees or your team, your prospects, your clients, your friends, everybody to figure out exactly what it is that you do and decide very quickly if what you do is something that would be good for them. And that really helps to polarize the marketplace, which is what you really need to do because not everybody is your ideal client.
Yep.
What you want to do is polarize the market so that the people who are your ideal client, it's very, very clear to them who you are. Everybody else doesn't even bother picking up the phone to call you because they know, because it's that clean, it's that clear. That's exactly what simplification means, and it has to be done throughout the entire organization. And to get there is hard work. It takes a lot of thinking in order to clean up your message and clean up your processes and your systems so that you can be as effective and profitable as possible.
And it doesn't stop after you get it done the first time because it's very easy to add complexity as we go along. The hard work never stops on this. It just the hard work gets easier because it becomes part of our process of, are we articulating what we want? Are we able to communicate that out to our teams, which if we are, you're right, Les, we are more effective. We are more efficient. Everybody understands. We don't have high turnover and we don't have high mistakes and we don't have low engagement. It's the opposite with that active work, that active work. So we talked a little bit about simplicity. We were talking about articulating it and communicating it. And this comes down to really living it. And one of the things that I've taken away so far, one of everything that I've always known about you and our relationship so far, but for our audience here, the leaders that listen to the Voice of Bold Business, which by the way, everybody, this is program 19, Transform Obstacles to Building Blocks. We really need to stop and think. We need to stop to see what we're looking at, to feel what we're looking at, to really understand the experience of it so we know how to proceed.
There's another mission statement that I really, really love. It's my favorite all-time mission statement. And this will help the listeners who don't understand or haven't taken the time to really wrap their minds around the value of a very clear mission statement. And it comes from the Newport News Shipbuilding Company, which has been around for, God, a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to say it exactly the way it's written, but you'll get the gist of it. Their mission statement says, we exist to build great ships, for a profit if we can, for a loss if we must, but we exist to build great ships. The simplicity of that message is that it communicates to everyone, from the entry-level person all the way up to the CEO, what they're there to do. They're there to build great ships. Now, you have to dig a little bit to figure out what they mean by great. And if you did dig a little bit, you would find out that what they mean is they need to be safe, they need to be efficient, they need to be effective, they need to be enduring, they need to live up to all the they need to be affordable for the scale and the scope of the vessel. All of those things is what they need to be. And so it becomes very, very easy for the entire organization, from the janitor to the CEO, to wrap their head around exactly how they contribute to making sure that that happens. You eliminate a lot of complexity when you make your message that clean.
You do, and I'm really glad that you used that. I will look it up and find a link to it if I can online to stick into our program notes, because I think that's useful to be able to hear you talk about, and then to be able to go back and look at it and see the longevity of the Newport News Shipbuilding Company, as well as being able to use them as an example. I go back to Abraham Lincoln. He said so much in so little all the time. Just like in a business, we need to polarize our markets. His thoughtfulness and the words that he used told people exactly where he stood. There was no gray area. Well, there's always a gray area, but in general, that gray area was reduced and reduced so that it became very clear. Okay, this is what I mean. This is where we're going. This is the vision, and here's what we're going to do.
If you rehearse the mission statement of the Newport News Shipbuilding Company, you can hear not only their mission and their vision, but you can also hear the values tied up in that statement. Everything's all in that one statement. It makes it very easy for everyone. I don't care who you are. I mean, as long as you can read and understand what you're reading, to figure out exactly what they stand for and what they're focused on. If you're in the position where you need a ship, there'll be no doubt in your mind that if you do business with the Newport News Shipbuilding Company, you're going to get a great ship. Whether it costs them profit to produce it or whether they make profit producing it, doesn't matter. They exist to build great ships. Just like Disney exists to make sure that every customer who comes through their gate with a smile on their face leaves their premises with an even bigger smile on their face. There's one little story I want to add to that Disney tale, because I think it's a great example of what can happen inside of a business, and it'll reinforce this message. One of the things that I observed, and I haven't just observed this at Disney, but I've observed it in other businesses as well who really get it. But one of the things I observed, I was standing in line, and it was a long line at one of the gift shops to buy something. And there was a woman in front of me who had a kid in a stroller and a kid in one of those little backpack things on her, on the front of her, right? Yeah. She had a purse on one arm and a diaper bag on the stroller, and the lady rang up the amount of money that she needed, and the lady already had some money in her hand. She thought she had enough. She was paying cash, and she came up about $1.50 short. And the girl behind the counter could tell that the lady was anxious because she felt like she was holding up the line, started to scramble for more money, but, I mean, she was already overburdened. Right. And the girl behind the counter said, "Ma'am, do not worry about the $1.50. I've got you covered. Please accept that gift from us, and please enjoy the rest of your trip." Well, what do you think it did for that lady?
I felt relief. Right here. So
yeah.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
It made her feel to let go of some of what she was doing and recognize that it is what it is, and somebody made it a little easier. That is humanity at its best, right there.
$1.50, and that lady not only left the park with a big old smile on her face, but how many people do you think she told?
Yeah, exactly.
And so what did that do for the cost of marketing for Disney?
Well, it made it a little less, because what are they doing? They're creating these raving fans, and they're doing that little bit of extra, that +1, which, by the way, Raving Fans is a book that I absolutely love. It's an easy read. It's a story about a fairy godmother, happens to be a man. It's cute all the way through. It talks about creating the +1. A lot of people don't get that. And now we're going to move into the thinking piece, because part of living those values, part of communicating those values, part of modeling those values comes from stopping to think and keeping that complexity out, like you've been talking about. I have a problem in front of me to solve. I have an obstacle. I have barriers. How do I get started with each of those?
We assign more trouble to problems and obstacles and barriers than is actually real. A lot of people, if you watch them, you can see that their mindset concerning problems is to be surprised and to get angry and to cuss and spew and to feign responsibility while casting blame, instead of just accepting that that's the way life is. Every morning when I get up, I have a plan for the day. Every day, at the end of the day, I realize that most of my expectations did not get met. I was hoping, well, I'm serious, because I was hoping that the traffic would be light and it was heavy. I was hoping that I would get all green lights and I got all red.
Right.
I was hoping that I wouldn't have to stop and get gas, but I had to stop and get gas. And I could just go on and on and on. And we have all these hopes for the day, or these expectations for the day. And when they don't go the way we hope they would, if we're practicing the wrong mindset, we act angrily towards it. And it's foolish. It's a fool's game to behave that way. What we should be doing is going, I'll not be surprised today because I expect problems to arise. I expect most of my expectations will not get met. That's life in business. It doesn't matter if something doesn't work out, because I'm prepared to respond in the most effective way possible. So having the right mindset is the beginning of really becoming good at solving problems very quickly with the least amount of emotional weight. I view problems this way, Jess. They deserve zero negative emotion from me. Zero. So if I approach a problem from that mindset, then it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly what I can and cannot do to solve or eliminate the problem. And it should be very simple, right? Can I do something about it right now? If I can't do anything about it right now, I set it to the side and I go, okay, when can I do something about it? If it's not till tomorrow, then I put it on my schedule to solve it tomorrow, and then I move on to something else, free from the entanglements of that problem. If I can do something, can I do something right now? And if I can, then I do it right now. If I can't do something until later, then I create a trigger to remind me to do it later. That's what you do with problems.
The mindset of, I'm not going to be surprised today. There's two things for that. Automatically, we have not overcommitted ourselves. We have not made it necessary for us to hit every green light to go from our last meeting to the next meeting and not be able to stop to go to the bathroom or have a drink of water, and we can be present in the moment. The other piece is, I liked when you said, I'm prepared to look at whatever comes up. That is really awesome, because I know it's easy to let our emotions take over, and being able to just have that phrase, I'm prepared to look at whatever comes up, that right there says, okay, that includes me. That includes, I might have a negative reaction. I might get frustrated I'm stuck at every red light. I also might be able to go, I have 5 extra minutes. Who knew? What a blessing that is, because I can do 10 jumping jacks because I've been sitting a little too long. Or I can make a call to somebody that I haven't heard from, but that they're on my radar. Things like that, which are really important. And they make all the difference in the world, because it allows us to then practice presence, to be able to go from thing to thing without taking a little bit of that baggage with us.
You nailed it, especially the part about making sure that the plans leading up to whatever this problem is put you in a good place. It's when we don't map out our steps cleanly or clearly that we create a lot of problems for ourselves. And you use the example of leaving too late to get to your appointment and then hitting traffic or hitting a red light. Because I live in an area where water is everywhere, and we have 4 tunnels that we have to navigate through. Guess what happens to those tunnels? Sometimes people get sideways in them and it stops the tube up, and I'm stuck. I can't do anything about it.
Right.
When I am going to meet someone and there is some level of urgency, whether it's my urgency or theirs, I'll always, when I'm setting up the appointment, ask them, I say, let's pretend that it's the day of and I've left in plenty of time to come and meet you, but the tube's backed up and I can't get through. And I know now I'm going to be late. How do you want me to respond? What would you like me to do? And so I ask them how they want me to behave in that instance. So when the day arrives, if I do actually end up getting stuck in the tube, I can relax. I can simply do whatever the person asked me to do without getting all anxious and upset. It just makes life so much more fulfilling and rewarding.
And you actually brought up a covey thing right there, you were talking about thinking with the end in mind. And even on the most simplest things, because nobody sits around and plans what happens if I'm late for a meeting. And the thing is, when we do, we separate ourselves out from everybody who doesn't, and we stand out. And in this world where we're building integrity, we're doing what we say we're going to do, we're practicing responsibility, we're seeing that others can rely on us, we're setting an example and we're modeling that forward. And I liked how you were talking about how do they want you to communicate with them? Because even if I have to drop something in the middle of the day, I know which things I can drop to catch up and which things I can't drop. And in the unexpected event that something is necessary and I'm going to be late or it's just not going to work out, because I have some sort of a plan, like when I'm putting these things in my calendar, I put every piece of information I possibly might need in this calendar to get a hold of this person when I'm making an appointment. But it's because I'm thinking about having that information in my fingertips in the future that, it might take an extra minute. And yes, when you set 20 and 30 meetings in a week or a month, actually probably more like a month, in a month, that's an extra 30 minutes. But if it allows us to be calm and collected, that is the best 30 minutes we could have ever spent because of how we're able to show up with the person we're
30 minutes on the front end saves hours of grief downstream. I didn't learn that on my own. I learned that from David Sandler from Sandler Training. Years ago. He taught that. It's part of his selling methodology, and it's called an upfront contract. It's called being disarmingly honest. And so to add to the context of this conversation, Jess, and put a little more meat on the bones, being disarmingly honest. So let me give you an example. We sell something to someone, and now they're getting ready to experience what they bought. And so in my case, I coach business owners and entrepreneurs. And I know from having done this for the last 15 years, what their experience is going to be like during the first 30 days and at about the 60-day point and about the 90-day point. And so I always bring up what that's going to be like for them so that when they're experiencing it, they'll know how to behave. So I'll ask them, I'll say, what's going to happen in about 90 days? First of all, right now you're going to be very excited and ambitious and enthusiastic about what you're getting ready to go through because you've made a decision. And making decisions makes us feel good. And so in the beginning stages, it's going to feel great. But in 90 days, you're going to start feeling like, man, this is more work than I signed up for. I didn't realize this was going to be this painful. So when that happens, how are you going to respond? How are you going to behave? I just leave it in their lap and I shut up. And they stew on it for a little bit. And then finally they'll say, well, I guess you'll remind me of this conversation, won't you? And I say, yeah, I will. And they may ask me, well, how is it you want me to behave? And I'll say, well, how do you think I want you to behave? And they'll say, well, I guess you want me to suck it up and realize that if I'm going to get the result that I want, I'm going to do work and grin and bear it, right? Yes. And so when the 90 days rolls around and they're starting to feel like, oh my God, I just remind them, you remember the conversation we had? And they say, yeah, don't say anything else. And it eliminates problems for me and for them because I took the time on the front end to address what was going to happen downstream. And it just makes life so much more beautiful for them and for me. Yes.
And I have a phrase, it's okay to fly by the seat of your pants as long as you know what direction you're flying. We have to know enough that we can help other people too in the moment. I was just having a conversation about asking for help and the fact that we sometimes have to admit we need help and that we would rather go to Google and see if we can figure it out on our own instead of talking to another person. Doing research, going out on the internet is only going to get us so far. There's this concept of this human connection and being able to be vulnerable, but also the more we practice this vulnerability of recognizing where we're limited in our knowledge actually also saves us time because we don't have to think too hard about the fact, do we want to do it? Do we not want to do it? Can I learn this skill? Can I not learn this skill? We already know all of that, so we can ask questions like, is this the right money right now? Do we have the budget to make it happen and be able to prioritize for that effectiveness, for that growth? for that goal achievement.
The other side of that, Jess, is that I realize I'm human and I make mistakes. I've been on the planet long enough to know where I'm strong and where I'm weak, and I know where I'm going to mess up and where I'm going to shine. And so when I onboard a new client, I always talk about that. So when you experience me doing this or doing that, how are you going to respond? How are you going to behave? How are you going to react to my weaknesses when you experience them? Let me give you another example. I have a longtime client who is a roofing contractor, and they do about $10 million a year in business. That means they have a lot of trucks, and they have a lot of people, and they make a lot of mistakes. In fact, a lot of times in the roofing business, you'll go out and do a roof, and then it'll rain and it'll leak. And you would think, well, why would that happen? Well, because a roof is a pretty complex thing. And sometimes even putting a brand new roof on, all the little details that have to be addressed don't get addressed, and you end up with a leak. So what we started doing with them is we had customer service talk about a few of those things on the phone with their customers up front, so that when things happened, like the truck broke down or they didn't show up on time or they couldn't meet the appointment because their rain schedule screwed up their scheduling or whatever, the customers knew how to act and how to behave, and it eliminated a lot of problems for them in their scheduling and in their ability to get them into jobs to do the work and do it well. And anybody who does customer service can deploy steps like that to eliminate all the, I'm calling these problems, we could call some of them obstacles in this particular instance. It's all about being disarmingly honest. Let's face it, we're not perfect. We're going to screw up. And anybody who says they're not is lying.
Right. Yes.
You know, they're setting themselves up and they're setting the other people up for disappointment and a lot of grief. So if you're disarmingly honest, you eliminate a lot of problems.
Things have changed so fast in the last 3 years and 5 years. I mean, even since I started in business in the late 90s, I have to tell you, what we experience is very different. So customer service being part of every single role in an organization, we're really talking about having an experience expectation. I love the honesty, the disarmingly honest. We don't come by that honestly nowadays. Even though we're more connected than ever before, there's still this element of, yeah, whatever. Yes, I can do that. Yes, I can do that. Yes, I can do that. Yes, I can do that, without thinking through and going, well, in those particular cases, now that we've said we can do that, here's the reality of it. And does it actually make sense? Is it actually useful? Because I think what ends up happening is maybe sometimes we think we have a problem, but it turns out we have an obstacle. Or sometimes we think we have a problem, but we actually have a barrier. Barriers are the hardest to understand and define and recognize. That how do we break it down and how do we figure out where the start is? Well, just by thinking we might have a problem and recognizing there's something more, or there's actually a series of problems that have this overarching theme, and being able to then decide what comes first, what comes second,
right,
and what's in line with our mission, what's in line with our vision, what's in line with our values, and taking all that and what's in line with our goals for this month, this quarter, and this year. It goes back to that pre-planning. If we've thought about that all up front, making decisions, it's good. We feel good when we make a decision, but we know, we have a pretty good chance of knowing what's going to come up because we've done all of that thinking. So we can stick to our time frames.
Well, if you're in the startup phases of your organization and you don't have a lot of road behind you, maybe you'll have a more difficult time identifying where you're going to come up short and what customers are likely to experience.
Sure.
But if you've been in business any time at all, it's pretty easy to identify where the gaps and the deficiencies are just by paying attention, and then being able to address those both from the communication standpoint by being disarmingly honest, but also by figuring out why those gaps and deficiencies exist and doing something about them so that they don't continue to plague your operation.
Hey, guys, I don't know if you can tell, but Les and I really enjoy talking about this. So if you're missing anything, we're moving really fast. You may need to hit rewind and capture some of these. And the program notes will outline a lot of it as well. The concept, though, really being is that we can transform. And I want to move into a section where let's actually talk about transform. Because people think we have a product, something's going to happen in this magic box, and we're going to have customers and profit that come out the other side. Well, there's a kind of a transformation that occurs. And in that one, it's sales and marketing and advertising. But it's amazing how many black magic boxes that we actually assume are just going to take care of themselves. And we end up recognizing too late that we have these assumptions in place. And it pushes us to find out and say, we have a problem, we have an obstacle, or I don't know what we have, but it's probably a barrier because I don't even know where to start. And this concept of transformation, it starts with pain. And it's pain and suffering. When you hear Les and I talk about pain and suffering, they're like, what does that have to do with business? Well, it hurts when we're not profitable. It hurts when we have high turnover. It hurts when we can't deliver the product and getting the satisfaction from customers. That's suffering. That's maybe not us personally suffering, but that's our business suffering. And those are pretty loud cues. It's kind of like if you whack your funny bone in your elbow or in your knee, it stings and you can't really think and you can't really talk for a little while. There's this pain and suffering that we have to go through. And then we're like, oh, I got to avoid that again. And then we can move forward. But it's in that moment of pain and suffering that something happens that goes, I've got to do something here. And Les, what do you think we need to be doing in those situations where we find ourselves totally stuck in this place?
Yeah. I haven't always been of this opinion, but my experience since about the year 2000. So I've been doing this for quite a while now. Prior to this, I got upset at everything. You know, I was out of control. It's not that I didn't achieve success. I did, but it was wrought with all kinds of anguish and unhappiness because I was always fighting. It looked like I was walking around with boxing gloves on all the time. And what was interesting was that I had this belief that I was a pretty optimistic, the glass is always half full kind of guy. But inside there was this war going on with me. But in 2000, really in 1998, that all came to a head. And I began to really transform myself because I had been in the fiery furnace long enough. I had reached a point where I had been in pain for so long that I just couldn't stomach being in it anymore. And I began searching for ways to remove the pain. And one of the first things I realized was that my mindset was all screwed up, that the way that I was looking at my life and my business and my relationships and the world was all screwed up. And it really kind of came out of my study of the Bible initially. And then I started finding it in lots of other places and lots of other books, lots of other audio teachings, in conversations with really smart and successful people. One of the first things I learned was it's not outside forces that make us feel something. It's what we tell ourselves that make us feel how we feel.
Right.
So, you know, nothing is good or bad. It's how we define it determines what it is. So, for instance, if I get a flat tire and I tell myself that that's the worst thing in the world that could be happening to me right now, how do I feel?
It is the worst thing that could be happening right now. Yeah.
Exactly. But if I say, oh, well, I got a flat, this gives me an opportunity to, you know, to practice my flat changing skills. How do I feel? Yeah, if I practice that, now I got to be honest here, disarmingly honest here. When I first discovered this truth and I started practicing it, it wasn't easy. I wrestled with this negative emotion associated with the meaning that I was habituated to giving things that went wrong. But I had already decided that I was going to practice redefining things in the moment so that I could develop that muscle and get really good at not giving it a negative meaning. And so it took some time, but eventually I got to the place where when a car broke down or I got a flat or one of my people didn't show up on time or a customer called up and complained, I quit giving it a negative meaning. And so by not giving it a negative meaning, my thinking stayed clean. And it made it easy for me to see lots of ways that I could transform the problem or the obstacle into a capability or into a solution much more freely and much more effectively. And in most cases, much more profitably than I had ever before in the past. So it was all about changing my mindset or cleaning up my thinking, Jess. I think that's the first step. If there's an audience member, business owner, entrepreneur, whatever, leader whose past was like mine, where they felt like they were fighting everything and they're sick and tired of fighting everything and they want some freedom, the first step is to challenge all your assumptions and question the way that you're defining things and realize that anything that appears bad in your life is bad because you've defined it that way, and you have the power to redefine it or reframe it and give it a better meaning so that you experience some freedom. And that freedom will then give you access to your resourcefulness. And your resourcefulness, by the way, is your unique genius, which will allow you to solve your problems much more freely, much more effortlessly, much more rewardingly. Boom, that's where it begins.
I love the type of chiropractic care I'm in, and I take a lot of classes from them, so I have a lot of stories over time. And this particular one, Matthew Mancuso was talking to us when I first started. He's like, this is why you're in care, and this is what your body does. And he had this doll, and he's holding up this little doll. It looked like an ugly doll, if you know what those are. And all of a sudden he goes, so what we do when our body is in pain is our body just shuts it off because it needs to focus on other things. And so it takes the resources and puts them someplace else. It shuts them off. And all of a sudden he pulls the leg off this doll and throws it across this room. Well, he repeats this story. So it starts with your legs and your arms. And so now you have this, all the legs and the arms are coming off and they're flying across the room, and all that's left is your torso and your head, and your brain is going to preserve itself because that's what innately our bodies do to stay alive. It starts shutting everything down. So at some point, your brain and your body are totally disconnected. And the point being is, when we feel like that, there's either a physical pain, there's a mental or an emotional pain, we feel at a loss, which is what I heard you describing of being, attracting all of these negative things to us, not because we were really attracting it to us, but because that's just how we thought. So no matter what happened, that's the way our perception was, and we make our realities true. And so how do you undo that? And how do you go find all those body parts and reattach them? And sometimes it's by just going, I don't have any power and I need my power back. I don't have any awareness and I need my awareness back. I don't have any passion and I need my passion back. And this is another part of this where there's some breathing exercises that go with that. But the concept is, I'm sticking my stake in the sand. I'm drawing that line in the sand, and I'm going to step across, and I'm not going back. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to not go back, which is where I think the challenging of assumptions, questioning the definitions, taking a look at what we've done in the past, not for the perspective of self-reflection, because we're done with that, but from the perspective of, and I'm going to go back to an earlier show and something that you said, Les, of taking the lessons that we can actually use to get to where we want to go and letting everything else go behind. That's what we're doing here. Putting our stake in the sand and saying, I am here, this is me, so there.
Living a happy, successful life is not for the weak.
Cheers.
Being a successful, happy business owner or entrepreneur is not for the weak. It's work, and it takes a lot of thinking in order to be successful at it. Now, are there exceptions? I suppose that there are some people out there who just seem to be born with that gene and everything seems to come easy for them. But for the rest of us, the 99% of us who don't fall into that category, if you're not willing to take 100% responsibility, if you're not willing to engage in the act of keeping your thinking very clean, if you're not willing to develop the capability for dealing with problems and obstacles and barriers, then life for you is going to continue to be very desperate, and it's going to continue to be a struggle, and you're going to continue to defer and push away your happiness until, which is what a lot of people do, when
and it does show up physically.
Is available to you. Well, yeah, it's available to you right now,
right,
if you'll just clean your thinking up. It's what I said 2 episodes ago, Jess. What we should do but don't is we should love everyone and everything unconditionally.
Right.
Right. In doing so, we don't give it these negative meanings. And if we don't give it negative meanings, then it can't cause us to spin negatively. And if we don't spin negatively, then we have access to our genius, and our genius, our individual genius, our unique capabilities empower us to solve any problem go around any obstacle or deconstruct any barrier so that we continue to make progress, we continue to achieve and contribute and to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So, boom, I don't know
Boom.
how to say that any more clearly.
It's true. People who are like, oh, we're not quite sure about this transformation stuff, well, then you're not in enough pain yet, because I will tell you, our bodies will tell us. It could show up as lethargy. It could show up as the inability to sleep, or insomnia, or eating issues, or the quickest way to find out that thinking needs to be cleaned up here, that there's something to be looking for and looking at more closely, is our emotional triggers. I know for me it's food and shopping. I emotionally shop and I emotionally eat, and I do it less than ever before. But I have to tell you, it's been a lot of hard work to, 1, recognize it, 2, see myself doing it, and 3, decide to make a change or not in those moments, and then 4, find myself in that situation less and less because my thinking and my behaviors and my concepts have changed. It shows up worse than that. Those of you who...
Yeah, Jess.
Yeah.
This is from Dan Sullivan. Dan is a brilliant guy, and I've learned a lot from him. But I've heard this other places too, so he may not be the one who actually coined this. But in fact, I think I heard this maybe from my grandfather years and years and years ago.
Okay.
The problem is never the problem.
Right.
The problem is never the problem. The problem is not knowing how to think about the problem. If you're not sleeping, that's not the problem. The problem is how you're thinking about your life, and how you're thinking about your business, and how you're thinking about your relationships. Something is distorted and screwed up, which is causing your nervous system to be restless, and it's affecting your sleep. Now, there's all kinds of ways that you can come at that problem. You know, you could do EFT, you could do yoga, you could do meditation, you could do some form of that and put yourself in a temporary state that will allow you to sleep. But a better, longer-term solution is to untangle and clean up the thinking so that the problem actually goes away.
And that's where our growth happens, because it's facing whatever we need to face and going, oh, I really don't like that. And it goes back to, here's my flag, here's my line.
Right.
I've had enough. And it's in that moment of I've had enough that we let go of all of that. Oh, I shouldn't say all of it, but enough of it to have a space for the seed that has been planted by that, to have some space to say, have I really had enough? Yes, I'm going to make a decision and change. Or, maybe I'm not quite ready. And we go backwards, back into that pattern that we're used to. I believe in this divinely. There's an innate knowledge that says, yes, now's the time, and we move forward. Or, no, it's not the time, and we don't. And sometimes we get in our own way. But other times, we try it and we fail, and we try it and we fail, and we try it and we fail. Because it comes back down to, I love that you shared something that your grandfather shared with you. The problem is never the problem. And that is key, thinking about it differently. We've talked about a lot of things, and we've stuck close to our problems, obstacles, and barriers. I feel like there's a little bit that has not been said yet, but I'm not sure what it is. So I'm going to ask you, what else needs to be said about this particular topic, our transforming obstacles to building blocks?
Maybe the final piece that needs to be said, Jess, is that because we don't think deeply enough about the issues that arise in our world, and I'm not talking about the larger world, I'm talking about my own individual world and your own individual world, and,
right.
And your listeners' our listeners' individual worlds, right? Because we don't think deeply enough, what it looks like if you could see it from 30,000 feet or from the ceiling looking down into the room, maybe a better example is it looks like people are going around putting Band-Aids on their problems. So I'll use the example of I'm not sleeping well. And so the advice they receive is, well, try yoga. Okay, so I go home and I try yoga, and sure enough, yoga helps me sleep, but the underlying problem's still in play. And so it quit manifesting at night while I'm sleeping because I'm doing yoga, but it's showing up in other places in my life and in my world because the underlying problem's not been resolved.
Right.
And the underlying problem is always the way we think about the problem that is in our world. It's not the problem itself. It's how we're thinking about it or how we've defined it. If we'll do the work required to untangle it so that it no longer has a negative meaning, or so that it's been reframed in a more effective way, then the problem actually goes away, and now it quits manifesting in my life and in my world. So it's important that we work on the right end of the problem. That's the place where a lot of people fall down, is they don't do what's required to get to the root of the problem. It's like you got this gumball tree in your yard, and you hate the gumballs being in your grass because you like going barefoot. But every time you do, you step on a gumball. And so the guy goes out and he cuts all the limbs off the tree thinking that'll solve the problem. Only the next spring, the tree puts out a bunch of more limbs because that's what it does, and it drops more gumballs. And the guy goes back out and he cuts the limbs off, and it just keeps repeating the problem year after year after year. When what he should do is what?
Cut the tree
down.
Pull
the whole damn tree up.
That's right.
Cut the tree down. Get rid of the root.
That's right.
That solves the problem. In business and life, if we don't do the work to get at the root cause, which is always our thinking, then the problem's going to persist, and we'll go around putting Band-Aids on it or salve on it, and then it'll manifest in some other way.
Right.
Make sense?
It does make sense. So if I were to say that a little bit differently, it would be when we stop to figure out what we're actually looking at. We could try something, and it may turn out to be a Band-Aid, but it gives us more knowledge to stop and look at the whole thing again with more information to try and find the root cause and go deeper each time until we're able to get to that root cause and make a fundamental change and put the energy and attention into that.
The other side of that, Jess, is that we each individually and collectively, of course, have a certain amount of knowledge that we hold within our nervous system or within our psychology. And in some cases, we're absent the knowledge that we need. And so as long as we're absent the knowledge that we need, we're going to continue to encounter problems and hardships and obstacles and even barriers in our life and in our business because that knowledge gap exists. We talked about this, I don't know if it was last show or the show before. Did we talk about partners in the last show?
I think we did.
I think we did.
Yes.
Yeah, so I used the example of my first business. I brought a partner in, and it ended up being a bad decision. Not bringing the partner was a bad decision. It was bringing the person that I brought in that was a bad decision. But the lesson that I took out of that was that partnering was bad, and I ended up missing out on that leverage for way too many years because I had a gap in my understanding, which prevented me from being able to solve that problem and then leverage the power of using partnerships for too many years. So my point is that sometimes what is required to eliminate the problems or the obstacles and barriers in our life isn't just cleaning up our thinking, it's also informing our thinking. Unfortunately, what happens in our society, in our culture, is that we think that school ends when we graduate or when we get our diploma. And that's not true. How we should view it is that school prepared us to learn the rest of our lives, not that we graduated from learning. There should be this ongoing process or habit of informing your understanding and keeping it renewed, because things change, and they change very, very rapidly. If you're not engaged in the process of continually renewing your mind with the latest and best information on the planet, then you're way, way behind. And you're going to continue to encounter all kinds of problems and obstacles and hardships unnecessarily simply because you're ignorant.
Ignorance can be bliss, but it can also be our greatest downfall. Everybody, you heard it here first, directly from Les's mouth. And we are out of time for today. However, this conversation is going to continue, and we're going to take a different route in the next conversation, building on everything that Les and I have talked about so far. So stay tuned. And if you haven't heard the other programs that Les and I have already done, go back and take a look at those programs, because they are worth the listen. You will find all the program notes at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com/P19 for this program, to transform obstacles to building blocks. And remember, every single thing that we've talked about starts with me, starts with Les, starts with you. You transform your problems, your obstacles, and your barriers yourself into building blocks to use. Until next time.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.